Thank you. I might know the answer to the next question, but recently Congress passed the Fair Sentencing Act, which reduced the cocaine to crack distribution from 100 to 1, and also eliminated the mandatory sentencing for crack cocaine. Do you believe that Congress should equalize them 1 to 1 because it does take cocaine to make crack?
I imagine there's a few of you who understand what has gone on there, but basically 100 to 1 means that those who use crack cocaine were punished 100 times worse than if you use powdered cocaine, and which makes no sense whatsoever, you know. But a lot of people believe that it could have been a racial thing, and it really ends up that minorities end up being much more punished because they're more likely to use the crack cocaine than the powdered cocaine. And finally, when the sentiment of the Congress and the people came around to softening that, it was an example of the people do have an influence on Washington, because anything you touch on drugs, legalization or anything like that, the politicians get terrified because they don't want to be painted, like, oh, I'm favoring drugs. But before the ratio was 100 to 1, and they came along, I was on another bill that made it 1 to 1. But they came along and made it 18 to 1. And I said, 100 to 1, if 100 to 1, and that's, a discrepancy, why make it 18 to 1? But anyway, it went through, and there was no problem. But I want to make 2 points, and that is that I abhor the use of these drugs as well as many prescription drugs because they are so dangerous. And but I see it as a parental responsibility. There's a lot of dangers in society. We can teach them to stay away from fire and poisons in cars and all this. We ought to be able to, it's our responsibility to teach them to stay away from the dangerous drugs. Alcohol is very, very dangerous. It's a legal drug, and yet it's pretty well taken care of by our states. And I've been told that some of the teenagers can probably find marijuana easier than they can go buy beer. So I am just so convinced that the war drug makes no sense whatsoever, causes 100 times more problems than the people who take the drugs, and that it is a problem. There was a judge on today who, from an experience as a judge, has just totally changed his mind and said, this drug war is just horrible. And he studied into it, and he said, if you really don't like what the Taliban's doing, legalize drugs, because they all make their money off the drugs. So no, I would, up until 1914, there was essentially no federal regulations. It was 1938 they started regulating marijuana, and we tried prohibition of alcohol. It was a total disaster. We woke up one day and say, this is stupid, after 12 or 13 years. So they repealed prohibition. But just think, back then, they wanted to prohibit you from doing something. Do you know they had enough respect to say, oh, that's not in the Constitution. We have to amend the Constitution. Do you think they do that today? No, they just run roughshod over us. They don't. They do all this without even considering the Constitution. Now, the regulation should come locally and protecting children the best you can. But the drug war is a total disaster, and this is just one example on how unequal it is. And there are some people who have committed nonviolent drug offenses, third time, automatic lifetime sentences without parole. It makes no sense whatsoever. And yet we hear of rapists and murderers and others getting out, but the third time they could end up in lifetime. So I believe that we are starting to wake up. I believe we will wake up. And when we have an economic dollar crisis, I really think that we're going to finally just say, well, in California, what's motivating them out there? They say, we can't handle it. We're not going to take you to court any longer. That's the failure of the economic system. They're not doing it because all of a sudden they agree with me on civil liberties. They're doing it, well, we're exhausted. We can't enforce this law anymore. I guess you'll have to make your own decisions, but just don't go crying to the government if you mess up your own life.
make you president for a day. Given the opportunity to nominate a future Supreme Court justice, what qualities would you look for in such a person?
I would want him to be able to read. And then have probably an understanding of maybe a 15-year-old or a 12-year-old and be motivated to protect liberty. If he could read the Constitution and he was motivated to use it to protect liberty, that's all that would be important. My wife is sitting here. I didn't introduce her later, but she's sitting here. And she had a good suggestion. She said, why do you guys go up there and write all those laws? Nobody can read them, and even if you did, you can't understand them. She says, I can read the Constitution, and I know what it says. So, yes, have them read it, and have them understand it, and have them believe it, and we'd be okay. But I guess they don't really read it, and then the understanding is always, you know, the few items that are really bad. The general welfare clause, that means you can have anything you want. That means you can bail out any bank or any big company you want. That's general welfare. Oh, I didn't know that was general welfare. I'd have them wonder, know what going to war without a declaration. What about the interstate commerce clause? Does that mean they can regulate every single thing you do and touch? Even if it was produced in the state and never left the state, they still claim because it might affect the economy of other states, therefore they have a right to regulate it. It's absolutely insane, so I think a little bit of basic reading, understanding, but a desire to defend liberty would satisfy me.
We're going to ask a couple more questions. You mentioned in America's foreign involvement in foreign affairs. What would be a baseline for our involvement in foreign affairs?
When would be involved in foreign affairs? Well, militarily, unless under rare circumstances, it should be with a declaration of war. The president has the authority, if under attack, he can defend his country. Let's say there was a foreign government actually attacking us on 9/11. Terrorism is still under the law, international law and our law, a criminal act. But let's say they attack us. The president can't wait for a declaration of war. He's obligated to defend our country. But to go overseas and participate in a war, it should get the approval of the people by a vote in the Congress. And that would have, prevented a lot of problems in the last 50, 60 years. And a lot of people would still be living if we'd have been following that. But what about our relationship in the world short of the military? A lot of people will say, I don't like what you're doing, and you'll hear the term, you're an isolationist. There are some who are somewhat allies. They don't like the militarism, but they become protectionists and they turn inward. They want walls up, barriers up. I'm not one of those. I already mentioned I like free trade. And it's not isolationism at all. Matter of fact, if you do believe in trade and sound money, there's a lot more going back and forth. I was in school in Michigan for a while in my residency. And, it was a total non-event. It's only been recently that leaving our country is a bigger problem. It was a non-event. Going to Canada was just nothing. You drove over and you drove back. We did that in Mexico when I was in the military in San Antonio. Drive to Mexico and come back. But now, not only are you worried about, what the rules are going into the country, but the biggest worry is getting back in. I mean, you can't leave and you don't have your passport, you're in big trouble. So I want relationships, to be as amicable as possible so that you can go and come and trade, have sound money, and in doing this, I do not think that the international financial or political institutions are worth anything. I think they cause more trouble. So I don't like the NAFTA, the CAFTA, the WTO, the World Bank, and all these United Nations institutions. I don't think that helps. I would say, they say that once again, you don't want to deal with the real world. But no, you can, because I think that system is always slanted and biased to special interests. If you're a big company, you might get better attention from the WTO to punish your opponents, your competitors, than you will if you're a small person. So free trade is a lot different than the WTO regulating it.
Congressman, this should be an easy question. Are you considered running for president in 2012?
You know, he asked it the proper way, because I've already admitted I'm considering it. But yeah, yeah. But it's a long way from making that decision. That is a big decision. And I also am very much of a realist, you know, about what it means. I'm convinced that these ideas that I've been talking about aren't my ideas. I'm just repeating what I've learned and what I believe America's all about. And I'm not convinced that I am the best person or anything like that. I don't have that type of an ego. But I am convinced that these views are correct. But I'm also convinced that they're not going to go anywhere unless people like you and others and more around the country support these views. Just like I said, the sentiment of the people changed on these drug laws, and they started to change. So when the people's minds change, the Congress will change. I think the Tea Party movement is very symbolic of that, where the two-party system has failed, and they're saying, look, government's too big, they spend too much, and all these things. So when the people are ready, you will have someday have a constitutional president. But for me, I still just think about it because people still ask me about it. Thank you very much.
At this time, we're going to, in the interest of time, we're going to end the question and answer portion. But I do want to thank the Congressman for coming out to speak with us. We really did enjoy it. Thank you guys as well. Thank you, Professor Spearman, for everything that you've done on this program, and thank the Government Law Society for it. And I would like to present the Congressman with this certificate of appreciation. On behalf of the Government Law Society, we would like to thank you for your contributions to this 2010 Thurgood Marshall Government Law Society Congressional Update and your outstanding contribution to public service.
Thank you. Appreciate that very much.
Thank you, Dr. Coming out.